Good morning, everyone. In previous lecture, we have started the inflammatory bowel disease. So, in first lecture, we have finished the introduction of inflammatory bowel disease, its etiopathogenesis, and pathology of inflammatory bowel disease. So, today we will see the next part, remaining part of this inflammatory bowel disease, that it includes clinical classification, clinical presentation, investigation, and management of inflammatory bowel disease. So first, we will see the clinical classification of inflammatory bowel disease. So this disease, it can be categorized as active colitis or flare. Whenever there is a sudden and brief burst of disease, then it can be called as active colitis. And whenever there are remissions of symptoms of the disease activity, then it is called as quiescent phase, so which means the phase of inactivity. So during this phase, the disease is usually inactive or patient may not have any symptoms. Then there is third phase, which is called as chronic continuous phase or partially active disease. This inflammatory bowel disease, it can be also categorized according to the site of involvement or the extent to which the inflammation is affected or confined. So we know in ulcerative colitis, the most common site for the involvement of the or the inflammation is rectum. So if the rectum is involved, then it is called as proctitis. So if this part is involved, then it is called as proctitis. And if along with rectum, sigmoid colon is also involved, then it is called as rectosigmoiditis. So if along with this rectum, this part is also involved, then it is called as proctosigmoiditis. And in some patients, the inflammation, it may reach to the splenic flexure. So if here is an splenic flexure, so if inflammation involves this area, then it is called as left-sided colitis. And again, if the transverse colon is up involved, that is this area, or beyond the transverse colon, that is ascending colon is involved, then it is called as pancolitis. So this classification is according to the extent of involvement, so that you should remember. Then again, the disease, it can be categorized into the mild, moderate, and severe according to True-Love-Witt's criteria. So we will see what is True-Love-Witt's criteria. So this criteria, it is usually used to categorize the disease between mild, moderate, and severe. So first, we see according to the activity of disease. Then second classification was according to extent of disease or involvement of, or you can say the involvement of site. And the third uh, is according to the features, so which through which we can classify it as mild, moderate, and severe. So in this two law criteria, there are 7 points on the basis of which disease is categorized into the mild, moderate, and severe. In that, first is Bowel frequency. So as we have already seen in previous lecture that in inflammatory bowel disease, you will get diarrhea, or you can say increase bowel frequency. So if bowel frequency, it is usually less than 4 per day, then it can be categorized as mild. And if it is 4 to 6 per day, then it is moderate. And if bowel frequency is more than 6 per day, then it is considered as severe. Then rectal bleeding, again, it is a prominent symptom in inflammatory bowel disease. So if this rectal bleeding, it is intermittent, means sometimes it is present and sometimes it is not there. So then it is mild. And if that rectal bleeding is usual, it is considered as moderate. And it is, if it is common, that it is always present whenever a patient has bowels, then it is usually associated with bleed, then it can be considered as severe. Third point is fever. So if fever is not there, means patient do not have fever, then it is considered as mild. And if there is possibility of fever, means sometimes fever comes, sometimes may not come, then it is considered as moderate. And if it is associated with fever, then it is considered as severe. Then next criteria is pulse. If it is normal, it is mild. If it is increased but less than 90 per minute, or it may be more than 90 per minute, then it is considered as moderate. And if pulse is always more than 90 per minute, then it is considered as severe. The next point is abdominal tenderness. So all you know what is mean by abdominal tenderness. If that abdominal tenderness it is absent, then it is considered as mild. And if it is oftenly present, then it is considered as moderate. And if it is always present, then it is considered as severe. Then hematocrit value. So all you know what is mean by hematocrit value. So if it is normal, then it is considered as mild. And if it is more than 30%, then it is considered as moderate. And if it is less than 30%, then it is considered as severe. The next point is ESR, that is erythrosedimentation rate. So if it is less than 30, then it is usually considered mild. Again, in moderate, it can be less than 30. But in severe condition, that ESR it is always raised, and it is usually more than 30 mm. So this is the true Lovitz criteria, on the basis of which you can classify this inflammatory bowel disease into mild, moderate, and severe. Now we will see the clinical features of inflammatory bowel disease. So first of all, we will see ulcerative colitis. So as we know, inflammatory bowel disease, it includes ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. First, we will see ulcerative colitis. So this ulcerative colitis, as we all know, it usually involves colon, and the inflammation is usually confined to the mucosa and submucosa. So in ulcerative colitis, the cardinal symptoms means the main symptoms which are usually, or you can say always almost present in ulcerative colitis, are rectal bleeding with passage of mucus and bloody diarrhea, so which is accompanied by tenesmus. So what is mean by tenesmus? So you can say patient has a sense of incomplete defecation, or you can say patient has some crampy pain in rectum, because of which patient has repeated attempts to pass the stool. So that is called as tenesmus. So rectal bleeding and you can say the bloody diarrhea, it is usually associated with tenesmus. The first attack, it is usually the most severe. That means any attack, or you can say the first attack of ulcerative colitis in an otherwise healthy individual, it is most severe, and also it is followed by relapsation and remissions. There are also some provoking factors which can relapse the episodes of ulcerative colitis. So they include emotional stress, recurrent infection, gastroenteritis, antibiotics, or NSAIDs. So all these factors, they are usually involved, or you can say they can alter or disrupt the normal gut homeostasis. So all you know about antibiotics, NSAIDs, or recurrent infections or gastroenteritis. So all these usually disrupt the normal homeostasis, or you can say gut homeostasis. And because of this disruption of this gut homeostasis, patient may have relapses. In mild ulcerative colitis, the constitutional symptoms do not occur. So you should keep in your mind that in the milder form, constitutional symptoms like fever, malaise, anorexia, right? So these type of symptoms, they do not occur in milder form of ulcerative colitis. Severe pain, it is not a prominent symptom. So you should also remember this. Many of students may write severe pain as a leading symptom in ulcerative colitis, as there is an inflammation. So whenever there is inflammation, many of them consider there should be pain. So, but in ulcerative colitis, the pain is not a prominent symptom. But some patients with an active disease, so whenever there is an active disease, they may experience some vague lower abdominal discomfort or mild central abdominal cramping. So, some patient they may have lower abdominal discomfort, or in some patient there may be some abdominal cramping. In severe cases, so you should focus on this line. So in mild cases there were no constitutional symptoms, but in severe cases you may get some constitutional symptoms like anorexia, malaise, weight loss, and abdominal pain can occur, and the patient is toxic. So how we can identify that patient is toxic? You will get fever, tachycardia, and signs of peritoneal inflammation. So these all findings are there usually found in uh, severe cases. Physical signs of proctitis. So why proctitis? Because we know the most common site of involvement in ulcerative colitis is rectum. So the physical signs, it includes, one is tenderness, or you can say tender anal canal, and obviously the blood on rectal examination. With more extensive disease, that means uh, uh, apart from rectum, if sigmoid colon is involved, or that inflammation is reached to the splenic flexure, so in that cases the patient may have tenderness to the palpation directly over the colon. So these are the physical findings patient may have with ulcerative colitis. Then laboratory findings. So what laboratory findings we get in ulcerative colitis? So that include elevated CRP, elevated platelet count, and ESR, and also there is decrease in hemoglobin. So it is obvious that if you get uh, ESR and CRP which are elevated, so they are the first phase reactant to the inflammation. So obviously they will get increase, and there is decrease in hemoglobin. So we know patient has, or ulcerative colitis has, rectal bleeding as a cardinal symptom. So because of rectal bleeding, patient may have decrease in hemoglobin. Then next investigation, or you can say laboratory finding, is increase fecal lactoferrin. So this is a highly sensitive and specific marker for detecting the intestinal inflammation. So you should always remember about this fecal lactoferrin. So this fecal lactoferrin, or it is a protein which is usually released by neutrophils. So why this neutrophil releases this lactoferrin? Because it has an antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. So obvious, if patient has gut inflammation, neutrophils will get attracted to the site of inflammation, and they will release this fecal lactoferrin. So because it has some antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. The next is fecal calprotectin. So this calprotectin, it is also a protein which is also released by neutrophils. And again, this fecal calprotectin, it has also antibacterial and antifungal properties. So because of this, neutrophils releases these two types of proteins. So this fecal calprotectin, it usually predict the relapses. So whenever there is gut relapses, obviously there is or there will be recruitment of neutrophils, and if there is recruitment of neutrophils, it will release calprotectin, and if there is increase fecal calprotectin, obviously it will predict the inflammation and its relapses. In severely ill patients, the serum albumin level will fall rather quickly. So why there is low albumin? So this low albumin, it may be because of decreased synthesis or increased intestinal loss. Leukocytosis, it may be present, but it's not specific indicator of disease activity. So that's, you should remember that even there is inflammation, it is not always, or you can say you will not get leukocytosis as always. But if it is present, it is not a specific indicator of disease activity. So what is a specific marker or specific indicator for this condition is increased fecal lactoferrin and fecal calprotectin. Then on sigmoidoscopy, you will get erythema and decreased vascular pattern and mild friability in milder form. So that we have already seen in first lecture. So you will get sandpaper type appearance in ulcerative colitis in milder form. So that finding is mentioned here. In moderate disease, you will get marked erythema, then absent vascular patterns. You will not get that vascular pattern, and there may be friability and erosions. And in severe form, there is spontaneous bleeding and ulceration. On barium enema, you will get again fine mucosal granularity. With increasing severity, the mucosa becomes thickened and superficial ulcerations are seen. But in severe disease, or you can say severe form, you will get deep ulceration which appear as a collar button ulcers, and this indicates that ulceration has penetrated the mucosa. So in this diagram, you can see that collar button ulceration here. So this usually indicates that ulcers has penetrated the mucosa. So in milder form, ulceration may be confined to this level, that is superficial ulceration. But deep ulceration, they are usually seen like deep collar button or collar button ulcerations. So this is again a significant finding which you can get in ulcerative colitis. The diagnosis of ulcerative colitis, it usually relies on patient's history. So patient history is always important. Clinical symptoms, then negative stool examination for bacteria, Clostridium difficile, and ova and parasites. So why negative stool examination? Because we already know that inflammatory bowel disease, it is an immune mediated diseases. So this obviously there are no pathogens which are involved, or most of the times the pathogens, they are not involved in the gut inflammation. Then sigmoidoscopic appearance, that just we have discussed. And lastly, the histology of rectal or colonic biopsy specimen, so which suggests the evidence of colonic, or you can say GI inflammation. The next part is Crohn's disease. So in Crohn's disease, the major symptoms are abdominal pain, which is colic in nature, and it precedes and is relieved by defecation. So remember this, in ulcerative colitis, abdominal pain, it was not prominent, rather than where in ulcerative colitis there was mere abdominal discomfort. When in Crohn's disease, you will get colicky abdominal pain. Second, patient has diarrhea, which is usually watery and does not contain blood or mucus. Then next one is weight loss, which is seen in almost all patients because they either avoid food, since eating provokes pain. So because we know in Crohn's disease, the most common site is involved is small intestine. So if small intestine is involved, or there is inflammation in the small intestine, there will not be any proper absorption. So that may be a reason for weight loss. And secondly, if there is an inflammation, so dietary antigens, it will usually provoke the pain. So again, because of this pain, patient will avoid the food, and because of this, patient may have weight loss. In Crohn's disease, you may get vomiting. That is because of jejunal strictures or severe oral ulcerations. So here, jejunal, if there is a stricture which is formed in this area, that is at the level of jejunum, so patient may have vomiting because the gastric contents, they will flow back to the stomach, that will cause vomiting. Or vomiting may be because of oral ulceration. So as we know, in Crohn's disease, so any segment can be affected right from the mouth to the anus. So if patient has oral ulceration, so that may cause vomiting. A low-grade fever, it is also noted in Crohn's disease, but if there is a high spike fever, it usually suggests intra-abdominal abscess formation. So that we have already seen in pathology of Crohn's disease that uh, Crohn's or you can say intra-abdominal abscesses, they are usually found in Crohn's disease. On physical examination, you will get evidence of weight loss, so that is obvious. Anemia, that is because of blood loss, and glossitis and stomatitis. There is an abdominal tenderness, usually most marked over the inflamed area. So whatever part of the you can say GI tract is involved, you will get the abdominal tenderness. So it may be small intestine or it may be colon. So mostly the small intestine. Then abdominal mass, it may be palpable, and this abdominal pall, it is due to matted loops of thickened bowel. So because of thickened bowel or intra-abdominal abscess. So some patient they may have a palpable abdominal mass on abdominal examination, and that is mostly because of thickened bowel and intra-abdominal abscess. And then perianal skin tags, fissures, and fistula, they are usually found in at least 50% of patients. So that we have already discussed in previous lecture that the fissures, fistula, mostly the enteroenteric fistula or enterovaginal fistula. So there are various types of fistula. They are usually common in Crohn's disease. So these types of fistula, they are usually seen in nearly 50% of patients with Crohn's disease. Then laboratory findings, it includes elevated ESR and CRP. So that is obvious because they are the first phase reactant to the inflammation. So they will get elevated. In more severe disease, the findings includes hypoalbuminemia. So there, so why it is there, that we have already seen while discussing ulcerative colitis, then anemia and leukocytosis. So these laboratory findings, they are usually, or you can say, quite similar to the ulcerative colitis. Then endoscopic features of Crohn's disease, they include rectal sparing. Rectal sparing is what? So we know that inflammation in Crohn's disease, it is usually segmental, and secondly, it avoids, or you can say, rectum is not involved in Crohn's disease. So rectum is commonly involved in ulcerative colitis, but rarely Crohn's disease. So on endoscopic examination, you will get rectal sparing, aphthous ulceration. So that also we have discussed in the pathology part of this disease, fistulas and skip lesions. So skip lesions, what that means, in between the inflamed areas you will get normal skin. So that we have already seen, because the inflammation in Crohn's disease, it is usually segmental. Then colonoscopy, it allows the examination. So the colonoscopy examination, it also useful for the examination of colon, and also it will help to take the biopsy of mass lesions and the biopsy of terminal ileum. In some patients, we may indicate upper endoscopy, which is useful in diagnosing the gastroduodenal involvement in patients with upper GI tract symptoms. So suppose a few patients, they may have upper gastrointestinal tract symptoms. So in that case, we may advise upper GI endoscopy. And then next investigation is wireless capsule endoscopy. So this wireless capsule endoscopy, it allows direct visualization of the entire small bowel mucosa. So this is an image which shows a capsule, so which is ingested by a patient, and this capsule, uh, it has lens here, so which captures all the images while going through the gastrointestinal tract. And this capsule, it is capable of taking thousands of pictures. So because of this ability, we get even minute details of inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract. Radiographical findings of this Crohn's disease. So in milder forms, you will get aphthous ulceration, so that we have already seen. Then cobblestoning, which is most frequently involves the small bowel. So we all already know so what is mean by cobblestone appearance of intestine. So on a radiological examination, here you can see the cobblestone appearance of the colon. Then in more advanced disease, you will get again strictures, fistula, inflammatory masses, and abscesses. So that we have already discussed. So in pathological part also, and in previous slides also. So all these findings you will get on radiological investigations. Now the diagnosis of inflammatory bowel disease. So how we are going to diagnose the inflammatory bowel disease. So first there is an chronic pattern of symptoms. So as we already know, and that we also seen in the definition of inflammatory bowel disease, that it is an chronic uh, disease, or you can say chronic disorder. So what is mean by chronic? If the symptoms they are persisting for more than 4 weeks, then there is a chronic pattern of symptom. And the symptoms which includes abdominal pain, diarrhea, which may be with or without blood, weight loss, and growth disturbances. So all these symptoms, they usually raises a suspicion of inflammatory bowel disease. And again, the diagnosis, it is usually made on the basis of careful history, uh, close observation of clinical pictures, evaluation of endoscopic, histological, and radiological findings, and finally the results of laboratory investigations. All these uh, factors, or you can say points, we have already discussed in previous slides. So all these points, they are necessary to diagnose the inflammatory bowel disease. A plain X-ray film of the abdomen, it is indicated whenever there is suspicions of complications like toxic megacolon or perforation. So that we have already seen what is mean by toxic megacolon and perforation. So perforation, they are usually seen in Crohn's disease. So if you suspect these complications like toxic megacolon, which means dilated colon, so which is usually more than 6 centimeter. So if there is a toxic megacolon or perforation, in that case, we can advise plain X-ray. This line is important because differentiation of chronic disease and ulcerative colitis on the basis of laboratory parameters alone is difficult. So that I have already told that laboratory findings of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, they were quite similar. So in both the disease, there were elevated ESR and CRP. There were anemia and hypoalbuminemia. So these are the laboratory parameters. So on the basis of these laboratory parameters, we cannot differentiate between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Then extraintestinal manifestation. So as this inflammatory bowel disease and immune mediated condition. So that means here is dysregulation of immune system or immune systems, immune response. So obviously you will get some extraintestinal symptoms because of this, this dysregulated immune response. So this usually found in both chronic disease and ulcerative colitis. But in Crohn's disease, nearly 40% of patients, they will experience extraintestinal disease manifestations, while this rate is significantly lower in ulcerative colitis. So even though extraintestinal manifestations, they are found in both ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, but the ratio, or you can see, or you can say the rate of extraintestinal symptoms, it is usually more in Crohn's disease, and it is nearly 40%. So what are those extraintestinal manifestations in inflammatory bowel disease? On skin, you will get erythema nodosum. In joints, you will get arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, and sacroiliitis. In lungs, you will get alveolitis, that is inflammation of alveoli, lung fibrosis. On heart, you will get myocarditis. in liver you will get fatty liver, and in blood you will get thromboembolic complications and autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So these are some extraintestinal manifestation uh, which can present in inflammatory bowel disease. The next part is complications. So first there is ulcerative colitis. So the complication of ulcerative colitis, uh, it includes massive hemorrhage. So we have already seen that in ulcerative colitis the cardinal symptom is rectal bleeding. So that rectal bleeding, it may be sometimes massive if ulceration it involves arteries. Then toxic megacolon, so that also we have already seen. So the transverse colon diameter, it is usually more than 6 centimeter on plane XL. So when we will say that it is megacolon, so if diameter is more than 6 centimeter on plane XL. Then perforation, stricture, and colorectal carcinoma. So all these complications we have already discussed in the previous part under pathology. In Crohn's disease, you will get intestinal obstruction due to the strictures and malabsorption and nutritional deficiency. So that is because small intestine, it is usually involved in Crohn's disease. So patient will not have proper absorption, and because of that, uh, you can say malabsorption. Uh, Malabsorption is there, and because of malabsorption, nutritional deficiency will be there. Now the management. So what is the management of inflammatory bowel disease? So as we know, there is no definite etiology of inflammatory bowel disease, and because of this there is no curative therapies yet available. So that you should focus, or you can say you should remember this line. We have already seen in the definition also that there is no definite etiology of inflammatory bowel disease, and hence because of this there is no curative therapies available. So what is the treatment? So only the treatment, it is aimed to eliminate the symptoms during acute flare or exacerbation, as well as to maintain the remission. So it means whatever symptoms they are present in a patient, so we should treat those symptoms, and secondly, we should focus on the remission of disease. So the principal classes of drugs which are used in inflammatory bowel disease, they are 5-amino salicylic acid, or you can say 5-ASA derivatives, so which includes mesalamine and sulfasalazine. So these are kind of antibiotics. They are used in the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease. Then corticosteroids. So there are various corticosteroids like cortisone, prednisolone, and hydrocortisone. So there are various drugs uh, which comes under this category. So they can be used for the treatment of this inflammatory bowel disease. And lastly, the immunosuppressants. So that means we already know. So in inflammatory bowel disease, it is an immune mediated disease. So that means there is a dysregulation of immune response, and also there was an imbalance between pro-inflammation and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So, and usually there was decreased level of pro-inflammatory cytokines and increased level of so there was decreased level of anti-inflammatory cytokines and increased level of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So this, because of this imbalance, there was immunological response against commensal microbiota also. So to protect this exaggerated immune response, immunosuppressants, they are used like cyclosporine. In recent years, anti-TNF alpha antibodies, like a drug called infliximab, it has been introduced in the therapy of inflammatory bowel disease. So why this drug, it is used against TNF, because this TNF, it is considered to be actively involved in autoimmune disease and immune-mediated diseases, so which includes inflammatory bowel disease also. And apart from inflammatory bowel disease, it can also be involved in or you can say it is used in rheumatoid arthritis. Apart from this medical therapy, there are certain general measures, but these general measures they do not include some dietary modification. The patients with strictures they should avoid high residue foods, and lastly, some supplementations they are needed like iron supplementation, calcium supplementation, and vitamin supplements. That is because we have seen already in pathogenesis, or you can say the pathological part. So if small intestine is involved, there is obviously the malabsorption is seen, and because of malabsorption, patient may have deficiencies of this iron, calcium, and vitamins. So if we suspect iron deficiency or calcium deficiency or vitamin deficiency, so in that case supplements are required. Then lastly, the homeopathic therapeutics. So the most common drug which is used in ulcerative colitis is Merck. So the indication is the blood and mucus in the stool. So which is a leading symptom of ulcerative colitis. So this leading symptom it is usually covered by Merck. The patients requiring this medicine it feels constant urge to pass the stool, but only scanty hot stool of offensive odor is passed. So that we have already seen that in ulcerative colitis, the diarrhea, or you can say the bowel frequency, it is usually associated with tenesmus. So that's it, as explained in Merck also. After passing the stool, urge reappears and patient gets no satisfaction. So that is again the feature of tenesmus, that patient has feeling of incomplete defecation. So this is the leading symptom of ulcerative colitis, and it is usually covered by Merck core. Then patient may have cutting pain in the rectum accompanied by passage of stool. So again, here you can see the symptoms which we have already seen in ulcerative colitis, that the rectum is the most common site which is involved in ulcerative colitis, and again in Merck core also there is cutting pain in rectum. So these are the indications which are useful in selecting Merck core. Next important drug is colchicum, so which is used for ulcerative colitis with jelly-like mucus in stool. The patient experience nausea of extreme degree uh, and even faint from the odor of food, mainly eggs and milk. So that is a key symptom for the selection of colchicum that has been mentioned here. So you should only remember that colchicum it is indicated in ulcerative colitis whenever there is jelly-like mucus in the stool. The next drug is arsenicum album, which is used for ulcerative colitis with stool of offensive odor and blood. So whenever there is offensiveness of the stool and it is usually associated with blood, so in that case arsenic album is indicated. The main symptom, or you can say guiding symptom for its use is stool with an offensive odor and dark colored blood in it. So this is the main symptoms that you should remember. So you already know that in ulcerative colitis, you will get a rectal bleeding, but if that bleed is usually dark color, that means bleeding has already started, or you can say it is usually present in ascending colon, or you can say transverse colon. So in that case, you will get dark color blood. So it is obvious that you are seeing dark blood in a patient with the suspicion of inflammatory bowel disease or ulcerative colitis. So that means that patient may be suffering with ascending colon involvement. So this is usually covered by arsenic album. So in the first drug, that is Mercor, it was typically used, or the symptoms were typical of proctitis, whereas in arsenic album, uh, it is used when the inflammation is extended beyond splenic flexure. The complaints they get worse at night, and the patient feels lot of weakness So that is an usual symptom of arsenicum album. This medicine, it can bring about relief when alcoholic drinks, watery fruit or cold drinks, they worsen the conditions. So these are the modalities which are usually found in this arsenicum album. And the warm drinks, they generally bring relief to the patients requiring arsenicum album. So that you should remember this line, that the patients who require arsenicum album, the GI symptoms, they are usually relieved by warm drinks. The next one is phosphorus. So as we all know, phosphorus, it is an or it has hemorrhagic diathesis. So you will get obviously blood. So it is used for the ulcerative colitis with stool containing blood and greenish mucus. So it is a beneficial remedy for the patients with ulcerative colitis where the stool contains blood and greenish mucus with extreme offensiveness. So there are two drugs which usually covers the offensiveness of stool. So one was arsenicum album and now the phosphorus. So in arsenic album there was no extreme offensiveness. So there was offensiveness but not extreme. But in phosphorus you will get extreme offensiveness, and the condition mainly gets worse in the morning. So in arsenicum album, the conditions, they were aggravated at night, but in phosphorus it is morning. So these are the few contrasting features between arsenicum album and phosphorus. The next drug is allosacotrina. So it is used for the Crohn's disease with loose stool. The patients requiring this medication or medicine, they complain of loose stool, which gets worse immediately after eating or drinking anything. So this is a key symptom which usually suggests the selection of allosacotrina. The patient feels sudden urge to pass stool and rush to the toilet. It brings relief from the cutting pains in the lower abdomen, which gets worse before and during passing stool and get better after stool is passed. So focus on this symptom because these symptoms we have already seen in Crohn's disease. The next drug is podophyllum. So it is used for the Crohn's disease with diarrhea. So it is obvious that patient will have diarrhea. But this diarrhea, it is usually watery, greenish and offensive. It usually gets worse in the morning, but in the evening the stool is normal. So this is again a similar feature that we have already seen in phosphorus also. That stool, it is offensive and greenish. That was also in phosphorus. It is worse in the morning. So this symptom, it is also present in phosphorus also, but in the evening stool is normal. And the patient feels thirst for large quantities of cold water. So again, this symptom, it is usually also seen in arsenicum album also. Then I have classified some drugs according to the conditions, or you can say according to condition. I have mentioned some drugs like for bleeding from rectum, that means proctitis, or you can say ulcerative colitis, Mercosol, nitric acid, nux-vomica, and hamamelis, they can be used. In patients with inflammatory bowel disease which has mucus, means there is excessive mucus, in that case you can use allosacotrina and colchicum. And if patient has abdominal cramps, so in that case you can think of colocin, diasporia and macphos. But if tenesmus is prominent, in that case nux vomica and capsicum. And if patient has weight loss, so that we have already seen that in inflammatory bowel disease, mostly in Crohn's disease, patient will have weight loss. So if patient has weight loss, so in that case, Ferramphos, Natramur, Cinchona, and Lycopodium, these are the drugs which can be think of. And lastly, uh, inflammatory bowel disease with joint pains. So that we have already seen that inflammatory bowel disease, it has some extraintestinal manifestations. So in that joints were also involved. So if joints are involved, means patient may have some arthritis or spondylosis. So in that case, Bryonia alba, Rustox, and Kali bichromicum, they can be used. So this is all about inflammatory bowel disease. These are the references that I have used for making this lecture. So this is all about inflammatory bowel disease, its introduction, etiopathogenesis, pathology, its clinical classification and management. So as this is a vast disease because it includes two conditions, but still it is very easy. The only thing that you should remember in inflammatory bowel disease, that you should clearly classify between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So at last I will say few differentiating points between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease is that in ulcerative colitis, colon is involved, whereas in Crohn's disease, the whole segment, or you can say whole of the GI tract is involved. In ulcerative colitis, the inflammation was usually confined to the mucosa and submucosa, whereas in Crohn's disease, uh, you can say that inflammation was transmural. The pseudopolyps, they were appearing both the conditions. Cobblestone appearance, it is usually seen in Crohn's disease, but not in ulcerative colitis. Then intestinal obstruction, it was common in Crohn's disease and not in ulcerative colitis. Whereas malabsorption and nutritional deficiencies, they are also common in Crohn's disease and not in ulcerative colitis, because the small intestine is involved in Crohn's disease. That's why you will get malabsorption and nutritional deficiencies. So again, rectum, it is usually involved in ulcerative colitis, whereas rectum is not involved in Crohn's disease. So that is again a differentiating point. And mostly the inflammation is continuous in ulcerative colitis and it was segmental in Crohn's disease. So these are few differentiating points you should remember while discussing or describing these two conditions. So for today, this is the end of the lecture. So in next lecture, we will see another topics.